This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app or join our emailing list at coldwarconversations.com. Colonel Terry Chester's flying career spanned some 42 years and 10,000 flying hours. He joined the Royal Canadian Air Force in September 1964 and in 1968 was awarded Navigator Wings. Terry flew for 3,000 hours on the Argus Maritime patrol aircraft, where he spent a good portion of his Royal Canadian Air Force career hunting for Soviet submarines in both the Pacific and Atlantic areas of operation. He was instrumental in the design criteria for sub-hunting capabilities when Canada procured the new Aurora for anti-submarine hunting in the early 1980s. Terry reveals submarine hunting tactics as well as details of Canadian participation in NATO exercises. Amongst other stories, he describes how he accidentally attacked a US nuclear submarine, perils of landing in Gibraltar, and Soviet sub-incursions into Canadian waters. He also recalls airborne meetings with Soviet aircraft and a trip in British nuclear submarine HMS Churchill. The battle to preserve Cold War history is ongoing, and your support can provide me with the ammunition to continue to keep this podcast on the air. Via a simple monthly donation, you'll become one of our community and get a sought-after Cold War Conversations drinks coaster as a thank you, and you'll bask in the warm glow of knowing that you're helping to preserve Cold War history.
Hello, this is Zachary Zabrowski, and I'm a monthly supporter of the Cold War Conversations podcast because of the wonderful stories that are shared from different areas of the Cold War.
Just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate. If a monthly contribution is not your cup of tea, we also welcome one-off donations via coldwarconversations.com/donate. I'm delighted to welcome Colonel Terry Chester to our Cold War conversation.
We were working with the Brits and our other allies in terms of helping to improve ASW, because during the 70s and 80s, so before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Navy were growing and becoming more powerful, more effective, and they were putting newer class nuke submarines out there. You know, the Alphas and the Sierras and the Akula hunter-killer submarine, the new Typhoon class. All these submarines were coming up online, and we were seeing all of this and saying, "Hey, everybody, is everybody paying attention to this?" You know, but then, of course, after the Berlin Wall came down, the collapse, the Soviet Union and stuff, there was a bit of a lull.
You said you were detecting Typhoons and nuclear ballistic missile submarines. I mean, the impression that is given to us in the UK is that our nuclear deterrent fleet of 4 Trident submarines is undetectable out at sea. But it sounds like what you're saying is if you know where to look and what you're looking for, you will find them.
Absolutely. No submarine is undetectable. Just the fact that it's moving through the water. And yes, they can quiet the blades down, but blades, the propellers, the little bubbles that come off the propellers, those make noise. The compressors, the auxiliary systems, the turbines, all of those things make noise. They can mask it to some degree. And yeah, there's it's called a quietening program, where they try to mask as much as possible. But that's a large chunk of steel moving through the water. And the only time that they are completely undetectable is when they shut off all systems and sit motionless in the water. Even then, there's some EMF and some sort of secret stuff that I can't talk about that the submarine is emitting. If it doesn't ever want to communicate, and if it doesn't want to do anything, it's undetectable. The moment it moves into a position where it's going to launch a missile or move into launches a torpedo or move to attack, it is vulnerable. And all submariners know that. And you're right, They brag that they are undetectable out there. They're not. Any captain, any submarine captain that is discovered out there when he's trying to hide and he's found is fired. That's how jealously they guard that. Of course, I go on record as being one of the few people that is known to have attacked an American submarine. I was on exercise out of Ballykelly in Northern Ireland. Believe it or not, we used to fly out of there we stayed at Navy barracks there called Sea Eagle, and it was actually right during the troubles that they were having, the late 60s and into the 70s. And I was flying there, and we saw there was a boat. Our target boat out in the exercise area, which was off of Scotland, was HMS Ambush, a British A-boat. And this beautiful old submarine, noisy as hell, had a deck gun on it, an old deck gun. So anyway, we saw the submarine. It was surfaced. And my nose called up and said, "The skipper, target submarine on the surface." I said, "Roger, prepare for Mark 54. Depths of attack." All simulated, of course. Down 100 feet. We come flying on in low level to ambush, and all of a sudden a green very pistol light goes up. And she calls us up on UHF, and she said, "Aircraft is a submarine. You've been shot down. Retire from the exercise area for 2 hours." We said, "Son of a bitch, what do you mean shot us down?" And he said, "Close me, you'll see." And they had this rusty old deck gun on the deck. There was seaweed still hanging on it and stuff. I said, "You can't shoot us down with that." He said, "You don't know that. You close me within gun range and you've been shot down." So I said, "God damn." So anyway, we left the exercise area, and I was seething mad that we'd been sucked into being shot down by an A-boat. So anyway, two hours later, I come back into the area, and I'm looking for this guy. I want to get an attack on him. And the skipper says, or the nose says, "Skipper, you're not going to believe this. She's on the surface again." And I said, "Right. She is not, you're not getting away with it this time." So I stuck her down about 100 feet, and I did come in from the sun. I said, "She's not going to see us." So we're flying on in, and I'm coming on in, and nose is conning me because I can't quite see it very well. He's down. He's got a much better view from the nose. And he says, "Okay, left, now. You see it?" I said, "Got it." Okay, Bombay doors open, whatever. And he said, "Skipper, this is nose. Go ahead." I said, Does Ambush have deck planes? And I said, "No." And he said, "This submarine has deck planes, has the little things that stick out the side of the conning tower." And I said, "Holy crap. It's not Ambush. It's a U.S. nuke on the surface." And so I said, "Stand down the attack." And so close the Bombay doors, and I'm like about half a mile back. And we fly right over the submarine. And the mad operator who's in the back doesn't hear "stand down the attack." And as we fly over the submarine, he says, "Mad mark, full scale." And he pushes a smoke marker out, which fires out a retro smoke out the back. And this thing lands right on the submarine. Clunk! It bounces off the submarine's conning tower. And so I said, "Holy shit." Anyway, I pulled up and turned around and turned back. And I look back, and I'll see this for the rest of my days on this earth. The conning tower opens, and this great big sailor is up there waving the stars and stripes from the conning tower, waving them at me. And then it goes up, "Aircraft, this is submarine, notify next of kin, successful attack." And I said, "I am so sorry." I said, You're right in the middle of an exercise area. We thought you were the submarine." And he said, "Oh, no. He actually bears from me 250, 10 miles. He's low and deep. So if you go from me out there, you'll find him out there." And no harm, no foul. It was an American nuke on the surface steaming into Holy Lock, I think it is. There's a
Yeah, it is. Holy Lock, yeah.
Holy Lock, it was steaming into there. Anyway, he had a good laugh. I was sure that I was going to get reprimanded for attacking a U.S. nuke. But I put it down as a kill in my logbook, and it's the only one I got. But anyway, then we left from there, and we went over to where he told us ambush was, and I put in a depth charge attack on him. So I felt better about the day. So that was the only time that I almost went to jail.
So, like the World War II pilots, did you have a little stars and stripes marked on the side of the cockpit as a kill?
Absolutely. I tried to do that, but I actually put it in my logbook. But I was at the time I wasn't very proud of it because it could have gone badly. But it turns out it didn't. But no, that would have been a great idea. Just like the swastikas on the Lancaster. The fighter aircraft. Yeah.
One of the questions I was going to ask you is did any of the submarines have, apart from HMS Ambush, have any anti-aircraft capabilities?
They didn't. When I was there, her biggest weapon was, of course, to be concealed. Once she was exposed, she was easy target. They had no way of shooting back. They basically could have stood in the conning tower with a rifle and shot us down too. But they honestly wanted to get under. Now later on, when I was flying the Aurora, it was rumored. I never saw it, but the Soviets used to brag that they had these missiles that they could actually fire submerged. They could, under the water, this thing will come up to the surface and could sense the frequency of our turboprop and would actually fire a little missile up at home on us and stuff. And so, we being the ultimate cowards said, okay, well then fine, we'll develop new techniques where we can lob our torpedoes from a distance. So we actually had a couple of procedures where we would fly in and then about a mile back, we would actually do a pull-up and lob the torpedo out so it would do a ballistic arc and land on where the submarine. So we didn't actually have to overfly them. But that said, the submarine could detect us. When we flew over low level, they could hear our engines and props down through the water. If they were close enough to the surface and they were listening for us, they could hear us. And so we always made a point never to fly directly over them unless we were going in to kill them. And so, it was interesting later on. Now, I would suspect, I don't know, I've been out of the game, but I would suspect now submarines have all sorts of defensive measures against aircraft where they can, in fact, launch a canister that floats to the surface and opens up and fires a missile at whatever aircraft is in the area. And the technology is certainly there to do that. But in our day, no, we weren't afraid of the submarine attacking us. One of the hard fail things on a check ride was that a pilot attempted to engage a submarine in his own medium. And so that was always a bad thing to do. We like to think that we were the hunter-killer and they were our victim.
On some of these flights, did you ever come across any Soviet aircraft?
Oh, absolutely. They would monitor us. The Bears, the Russian Bear, which they're still flying. They would actually come. They would bug us a lot. They were sometimes on our frequencies or monitor our frequencies. But the Bears still to this day come and penetrate Canadian airspace. I know they penetrate the UK airspace. They skirt along the edge to get the fighters up, see how far they can come before the fighters go up and bug them. But when we were out on patrol, we very often would see, not very often, we sometimes would see a bear shadowing us. And of course, they had a great speed and range advantage over even us with their turboprops. And the crews, we would listen into their frequencies too. And I had a Russian-speaking guy on one of my crews, and he was listening in to these two bears that were conversing with each other. He said, "You won't believe what these guys are talking about. They're talking about the same shit that we talk about. They're complaining that the shift is too long and that they didn't get any standby time. And then when they go home, they're on duty for another 3 days, and he's going to miss his wife's birthday." And so yeah, they were there. but we were never afraid that we were going to get attacked by them. They were there to see what we were doing there. I did get shadowed one time. I was up flying out of Adak, Alaska, it's when I was stationed out here on the west coast in 407 Squadron, flying the Auroras. We were monitoring Soviet submarines coming through the Bering Strait, the Bering Sea. When the Russian subs want to come from the northern part down through into the Pacific Ocean, they have to surface through the Bering Straits because it's so shallow. So we, of course, will be there, flying out of Adak, which is a long way out, and taking pictures of them, dropping sonobuoys to get their signatures and all that stuff. And when we're there, the Soviets were very unhappy with us, and I was shadowed by a flanker. I'm not sure what base he was out of in the Soviet Union, but he came right up and said to us, "You're in." Waggled like you're in Soviet airspace. We weren't, of course. We were out over the Bering Strait, so we knew exactly where we were. But the threat was there that, look, we don't like what you're doing, and if you so much as stray over this line, I'm armed sort of thing. But, you do what you do, right? We didn't get into some situation like the U.S. Navy where aircraft have actually been run into and harassed, etc. They just wanted us to know that they were watching us, watching them, and that we knew what the rules were, and we better stick by them. So yeah, I was always there. We were not. I was never really afraid that I was going to get shot down, but I was certainly cognizant of the fact that they could have if they.
Yeah. I think people forget how close the Soviet Union is to Canada and the USA up in that Bering Strait area. They almost think of it as being a Western, or certainly the UK think of it as a Western or a threat to our east. But obviously, up there, it was a very close threat.
Yeah. In fact, the Soviet Union is to the west, to the east, and to the north of us in Canada. A lot of our forces designed, in fact, the Aurora and the Argus we went on northern patrols where for like 18 to 20 hours over the Arctic we called them sovereignty patrols to make sure the Russians knew that we were surveilling our north, because you may be aware that large parts of that northern archipelago there are other countries challenge our ownership of them up to and including the North Pole. And so we're up there as often as we can.
Just going back to the identification of submarines. So yes. you by sound could identify whether a submarine was an enemy submarine or a NATO submarine.
Absolutely. Not only my guys used to brag. Not only can I tell you what it is, I can tell you the captain's name. Now they were joking, of course. But absolutely, you could tell the type of submarine it was, and whether all of his cylinders were working properly, and where he was going, how fast he was going, what depth he was. Very important. Under the water, although the ocean is a good transmitter of noise, there are many, many layers in the ocean, determined by temperature and salinity. So when sound will go in a layer, it will get trapped in that layer. So if your sonobuoy receiver, microphone, hydrophone we called them, was in the layer above that, the submarine could be right under you. You'd never hear him. But when you got into the layer, then you could tell exactly what depth that submarine was at. You could even detect, I'll tell you a story about HMS Churchill, which was a British nuke boat. I was operating out of Gibraltar. You mentioned Gibraltar there. A lovely base, hell of a runway to get into. I'm telling you, nightmare runway with that rock and the winds burbling over it.
And also there's a public road that goes across it as well.
Yes, we called it the Spanish Road. And we actually used that. If your wheels weren't on the runway by the Spanish Road, you had to go around. But what made it more difficult is the Spanish had surface-to-air missiles on the hill on one end of the runway, and you had to do a circling approach in there to not violate Spanish airspace. And on gusty, windy days when it was really difficult to get your airplane down onto that little runway, which had water at the approach and the departure end, knowing that these missiles were there and that our ESM operators were picking them up, they would track us in and out because we knew that there was no love lost between the Brits and the Spanish.
So they were painting you with their radar?
With their radars. Oh, absolutely. They would use us for tracking exercises. In any event, we were flying out of there one time, and the target submarine was HMS Churchill, old British nuke boat, and she was out, and we told her she was then sonifying the entire Mediterranean, which meant that she was making so much noise that it was almost difficult to locate her. She was making so much noise. There was something wrong with her turbine, and she was making a howling noise in the water that you could almost hear with your ear. So anyway, we called the boat up in between exercises and said, "There's something wrong with your turbine. You're making too much noise." And he said, "Holy crap! Thank you, Canada. I'm returning to port." So he returned to port. He's tied up in jib, did his fixes, and then asked for us to go back flying with him. So we went back flying, dropped our sonobuoys around, all sort of on the hush-hush, and said, "Yeah, your problem is fixed." Anyway, he said, next time, he said, I'm going to be back in harbor in a week. I want you guys to come down to the submarine. So as a thank you. So we went down there, and we went aboard Churchill, our crew. And he said, "You want to go for sail? We're going to go do..." So I told you before, I'm a bit claustrophobic, but I said, oh, okay. So anyway, we went out, and those buggers, they had this trick where they take a piece of string and they tie it across a pressure bulkhead in port, and they tighten this string up till it's like, bing, you could play a high C on it. And then when they go to sea, they dive, and then they take it back and they show you this string, and the string is sagging like a hammock. And they say, That's the pressure of the water that's crushing the shell of the submarine, and that's all around you. And then they looked at me with a smile on their face, like they knew that I was not happy, and said, we need to go back home right now. So, but what a great bunch of guys. Those submariners, I love them all. They're smelly, horrible people, but they are warriors like you will never believe, and they're all genuine great people. I love them all those submariners.
I'm sure the Royal Navy will be delighted to hear that from you.
Yeah.
You talked about the exercise where you released the smoke canister onto the US submarine.
Yeah.
What was the protection against you accidentally releasing weapons? Because if you're tracking these Soviet submarines really closely, there's potentially a possibility of accidental release, isn't there?
Absolutely. Yeah, it depends. When you're on exercise, of course, you're never carrying live weapons. So we were never worried about that. And whenever we did carry live weapons, occasionally we would do it just for the practice, right? Because there's a different upload procedure, and there are different cockpit procedures. When you've got live weapons, basically they're armed, and you can actually drop them unarmed. If, for instance, if I took off with a full bomb load and whatever, and I lost an engine, I had to dump my weapons. There's 3 or 4 big red switches on the navigator's panel that have to be armed. As the torpedo falls out of the bomb bay, it pulls the arming pin out. And so if you don't arm them, you could drop them out and they'll just fall into the water. But in terms of, and I have to admit, I was never on an armed patrol, where I was told there's a possibility you will need to drop this weapon, because I knew what the protocol was. I would go back if I found a submarine, whatever, and I said the submarine's engaging in hostile activities, he's surfacing, whatever, or he's just attacked the ship. I send a message back to base. Base, they actually have to go to the Prime Minister and say, we want authority to release a weapon. And so it would come back down and whatever, and they would say, yeah, attack, whatever. Then there was a protocol. I had to go. Ultimately, the aircraft captain, he was the guy that pushed the big red button to drop the weapon. So there was a strict protocol with a checklist. You had to have confirmation with a code word from headquarters to say you can neutralize this target. And then we would obviously go ahead and do it. Now, something that is not known is that the Argus aircraft was wired for nuclear weapons. I don't believe they carried one, even during the even during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I don't believe we ever carried, we used to call it a bucket of sunshine. We never carried a bucket of sunshine, but it was wired for it. And there were buttons on our armor panel, switches where we would arm it or whatever. But the protocols to drop that were like 10 times bigger than just the protocols to drop a torpedo, a depth bomb. But there was, you never say nothing, but there was very, very, very little chance that I would ever drop an active weapon on a friendly submarine. Because like I said, during exercises, which we did all the time, we didn't actually carry, and that we did carry dummy torpedoes. And when we were exercising against our Canadian submarines, we had a bunch of O-boats, Onondaga class, very, very capable submarine. I believe they were British class O-boats. Anyway, they were very stealthy and hard, but we carried dummy torpedoes. And when we were tasked, we would drop this torpedo, and it would acquire the submarine, but it had no warhead on it. And it would close into a certain point, cut off, fire its ballast out instead of exploding, and come to the surface where it would be recovered. And the submarine would know that had this been a war scenario, this would have gone in. Now, there was one really untidy case where the cutoff didn't work, and the torpedo actually drilled right into the sail of the submarine, and didn't explode, of course, it had no warhead. But the submarine surfaced with a very ugly torpedo sticking out the side of it, and trying to convince everybody that no, the attack had not been successful.
Well, I'd love to see a photo of that.
Yeah, we have photos somewhere in our archives of this submarine with a torpedo sticking out the sail, saying, "You missed me."
Wow.
So yeah, the chance of that happening was none.
Now, Sweden during the Cold War had a number of incursions from Soviet submarines. Were there any Soviet submarines sort of discovered in Canadian territorial waters?
Absolutely, yeah. They did come into our waters. I was going to say with impunity, they often tested us. They knew that if they were parked up off of Newfoundland or in the Straits of Belle Isle or wherever, that pretty much any target in North America was theirs. Certainly with the big deltas and the big boomers, the Oscars, so we were very, very careful. And that's where the SOSA system that I mentioned earlier came in, is they couldn't sneak in to our waters and remain there undetected unless they were doing nothing. So they absolutely did come into our waters. There have been some rumors that they actually came into Halifax Harbor, and took some pictures out of the periscope, and then left. Those sorts of things. It was always, they were probing us to see where our vulnerabilities were, and we were not letting them know that we were there. But we said, we know that you know that we know. It was all like a big cat and mouse game, right? And they certainly did that. And I know the Americans were absolutely paranoid that there would be a Soviet submarine lurking off in Canadian waters that we didn't know about and they couldn't do anything about. So we worked very, very closely. And like I said, I got a lot of good friends in the U.S. Navy that I worked over the years with, and we worked very, very closely together. They shared their secrets with us, except about their American boats, of course. But we exchanged data. When we found something new or whatever, we would put it into their system, and we were pretty sure that they gave us all we needed to be able to guard their northern flank, because they depended on us. And then, as of course, we're in with NORAD, and the combined defense of the northern airspace, but certainly the maritime approaches to North America. It was a great team effort between us and the Americans, and I have to say with the Brits as well. We had a very close relationship with the RAF, exchange positions. We would send pilots and crew back and forth, flying your Shackletons, your Nimrods, your ASW aircraft, other aircraft. So the triad of us, and you mentioned Sweden, Norway. We were and still are very close with the Norwegian Air Force and the Dutch, and even when I say even, especially with the Germans, and the French, the formidable Atlantique fleet. We had exchange positions with the French. In fact, one of my early instructors was a French Air Force exchange officer, where we flew. We used to go into Nîmes-Garons, which is where their training base is, and fly with them out of there. So all of our European allies, we worked very, very closely with on ASW, making sure that the North Atlantic was our territory, and that when the Russians came into it, that they knew that we as a team would work to make sure that they knew and we knew that they were there.
And where were you when the Cold War ended, or when, for example, the Berlin Wall opened? Were you still on the Aurora then?
I was, yeah. I was on the Aurora, and I was flying down east, and we watched that all happen, and I don't think we kind of realized, that it was the end of an era and the starting of another one. I mean, we woke up the next day and we knew that they still had that fleet. They still had that formidable fleet. Just about that time, there'd been a really bad accident. I think it was a Kursk. There'd been a Russian submarine that had sunk. Nuke submarine, I think, had sunk. And all the people, it was a nuclear meltdown or something. I'm just going to my memory. But we knew that they were still formidable. Our only concern was that all of these things were going to fall into bad hands, because from then on it was unpredictable, right? We knew who the bad guys were, and we knew what they did, and we knew how they did it, and now all of it was changing. But our concern was, and it played out, it became true, was that the Western Alliance has said, "Oh, good, the Russian threat is gone. Now let's have a peace dividend. Let's turn our swords into plowshares, and we don't have to spend all that money on ASW, on defense anymore, because guess what? The big threat is gone." As they used to say, if you want peace, prepare for war. And if things go south here in a hurry, we're going to be sitting back there saying, "Boy, I wish we should pay attention to those old Cold War codgers like Terry Chester."
Cold War codgers. That sounds like another name for the podcast.
The highlight of my life was certainly flying ASW in the Cold War. Men with a mission, we called ourselves. And nowadays, the threat and the enemy is so ill-defined, terrorism, etc., that it's hard to relate to the way we were in those days. So that's basically what I think. I had a great career. I feel sometimes like Billy Graham must have felt when he was preaching to the unwashed about what it was to be answering a call, because we felt we were answering the call, just like the guys did in World War II that answered the call and went and did their duty. We felt we were answering a call to do our duty, and we had a bloody good time while we were doing it.
Don't miss the episode extras such as videos, photos and other content. Just look for the link in the podcast information. The podcast wouldn't exist without the generous support of our financial supporters, and I'd like to thank one and all of them for keeping the podcast on the road. If you'd like to help the project, just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate. The Cold War conversation continues in our Facebook discussion group. Just search for Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thanks very much for listening, and see you next week.